All right. So, Sherrae, what was the moment that you decided to reach out for help? Describe that for us.
Um, okay, so I guess in a nutshell, there were many moments that culminated into one big moment. Many moments I considered reaching out for help, many moments I knew I needed help. Um, but the one moment where I couldn't deny it anymore was the moment that I began to spiral. Um, I guess I was married previously, and in my previous marriage, it was very emotionally draining and toxic. We were very young. My ex husband had some substance abuse issues, and neither of us had great coping mechanisms or, great examples of how to do this kind of love thing. We were super duper young in our early 20s, and there was infidelity. And I had just discovered it. So it was like, you ever have those moments where it's literally I'm in a car accident with my sister, say on a Thursday, a bad car accident where she's pregnant and hoping she didn't lose the baby. And in the middle of the night, I get a phone call, and it, later I found out it was my ex husband's mistress who was pretending to know me. And it's this whole like crazy, like Lifetime movie type situation that happens. And the next day I realized, well, he had been arrested and he told me it was for one thing, and it was domestic violence, right? It said domestic violence. Looking back in hindsight, sometimes the mind is so powerful that that denial is what is trying to keep you, right, from like losing it all. And so in that moment, I really started kind of uh, the rumination began, and I was like Persephone, like not obsessed, yeah, obsessing. I was obsessing over what happened. How did this happen? How did I miss it?
So, how did all that information come into you? Like, where, how did you receive all that, or like, how did you find out about all that stuff?
She was she was out of her mind enough to call me. And I'm like, that's a dangerous game you play, right? I'm a very, I'm like Erica Badu and I choose peace, right? Most times. But I'm kind of knuck if you buck when it comes to me and my family. And so she called me and she was playing this game, acting like she knew me. And I realized, like, when I talk to my clients about intuition, like my gut just like pulled me, and I woke up. This was 2:30 in the morning, and I thought it was my sister calling to tell me what was happening at the hospital because she was at the hospital from the appointment. And it was like this pull, like I literally rose up out of the bed and I'm like, who is this? What is this about? My husband was downstairs. I literally like ran downstairs, put her on speaker, and immediately he's like, oh no, 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 no.
So, not only did she call you at 2:30 in the morning?
2:30 in the morning, and she said she had my business card and that I was a therapist. And and I said, where was this at? And she said, oh well, yeah, because you live on the north side of town. Well, I knew, like, at 2:30 in the morning. Think about women and our intuition. Do 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 do, we always know. I'm like, I wasn't a therapist when I on this side of town. At that point, I was working for a welfare to work program. I was not a therapist at that time. So I knew that that was a lie, and I knew where it came from immediately. All the years of suspicions I had been confirmed in that moment, right?
So, at 2:30, she called. You had kind of known, like, had some suspicions or creeping sense that something was wrong. The woman that your husband had been sleeping with for a long period of time calls, at least 2 years. You run downstairs, put her on speakerphone. Describe that scene.
He immediately is like, no, 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 no. And I'm like, who is this? This is what I'm talking about. Who is this? And he's like, that's the girl that was, my friend's neighbor who called the police on me. Lies. And I knew it was a lie. And I went to bed on that lie, and I couldn't sleep because of that lie. And I woke up and called the courthouse the next day to confirm that it was a lie. And they said, ma'am, if it says domestic violence, that means they're in a romantic relationship. That's all I can tell you. And I am not proud of this moment, but I chose violence in that moment. I did become physical, literally dragged him out of bed, and I said, have your stuff gone by the time I get back.
That was the next day?
That was the next day, and I went to work. I went to work the day after a car accident when I was still physically not quite feeling all the pain yet because emotionally my adrenaline was high. And what I didn't realize at the time is I was cycling through stages of grief, right? Because I already knew that what I thought I had already lost. And so I was just cycling. Looking back in hindsight, when I think about it, I had to, take a bus to work because this man had crashed my car earlier that year. Total, the only vehicle that I had, drunk driving. And so I had no vehicle. So I'm catching a bus to work, seething the entire time. And then I call my friend and I say, I need you to come get me. The paperwork that had this address on it, I drove to where that address was. And it was some kind of halfway house, some kind of program for moms that are homeless and struggling and trying to get back on their feet. And the whole story came pouring out then. This
Mm,
woman first denied calling me, and then she said she called and she said, well, he used to abuse me. Has he abused you? And I'm like, wait, what? He was beating you? She's like, yeah. And, I got your number when he went to jail because it was in his wallet. And that's how I found out. And we have a child, but Child Protective Services took the child. Like when I tell you, like a Lifetime movie nightmare. And so I can't even tell you how I cycled. Mind you, I'm in my 20s at this time. I'm maybe 26, 27. I don't have the emotional bandwidth to handle this. I'm already struggling with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, ADHD that was at the time still undiagnosed. I'm struggling with anxiety and depression from my PCOS, from my hormonal imbalances. And I just, in that moment, lost it. I called him and I did threaten him. And I told him, if you are not gone by the time I get there, I'm going to light the house on fire. Be gone. And what scared me so badly at that time is I meant that with every fiber of my being, and I've never been a violent person. I've always been full of love, and no matter what he did to me, I could never bring myself to hate him. But in that moment, I meant those words I said, and it scared me. And when I drove home numb, but it was a spiraling of anger and rage to like almost being despondent. And it was just like cycling so quickly that the the events that followed afterwards, I gather bits and pieces of them. I know that at some point, I was crashing dishes around. Um, all I remember is we had these exposed brick walls in our two-story brownstone that we had. It was a two-story brownstone apartment, and I remember crashing dishes and the dishes just shattering on the brick wall. And I remember taking a piece of glass and cutting myself. And so when I think about did I want to die in that moment, I don't know if I intentionally wanted to die. I just wanted to stop the pain, right? And I wanted him to suffer. I wanted him to feel and I knew that or in my mind I felt like if he sees the pain he's causing me, I hope he suffers. I hope he sees what he's done to me, right? That was literally what I was thinking and feeling. At some point he must have called my sister. She came. She had nobody has ever seen me like this in my entire life. So she didn't know what to do. I had a supervisor that I used to work with when I first started working as a therapist. And she called her, and my supervisor said, well, she was no longer my supervisor. She was my friend by that point. She said, you need to call mobile crisis. And they called mobile crisis. I remember them being there. Probably by that time, I was back to being very despondent, kind of disconnected. And I remember them kind of making me promise that, kind of we as therapists, we have to say, do you commit to not harming yourself? Right. So basically a will to live. They had me verbally contract that I wouldn't harm myself, that I would call somebody. They came up with some kind of plan with my sister, and then they actually called around so that I could get somebody that I could see. And they made me call my doctor's office to get an appointment to see my PCP at the time, which is what I did. He saw me by the next day and prescribed me. It was a kind of low dose of Paxil, and I started therapy that very next week.
So you were a therapist at the time when all this was happening?
I had been a therapist. I had been a marriage and family and in-home family therapist. I have about 22 years of experience in community-based mental health. So I had been a therapist, but for that brief period of time, I had actually taken a step back and I was working with welfare to work. So I was doing case management at the time, which is how I knew that that person was lying when she said, "You're a therapist." And I'm like, "I was, but I left that job a
Mm,
year ago
right,
and I
right.
wasn't living here at the time." So
So you weren't at the time, but you had experience as a therapist prior to that. So what were your expectations of what therapy was gonna be like this time around when you decided to make the appointment?
I I think my expectation was I just felt like there was so much pain in me that I needed to release it. Even though I was a therapist and, a lot of therapists can probably understand this and folks who haven't been in this realm may need to understand this. Sometimes even if your therapist is good at what they do and they help you, sometimes they haven't achieved their level of healing that they need as well. So that's why they have that kind of wounded healer mentality. And so up to that point I had been very much so a wounded healer. So even though I knew how to help others, it was almost like a rescuer mentality I was codependent. And so obviously I didn't have great boundaries, even as a therapist. Even and I did in-home family therapy, but I didn't have great boundaries. And so in my mind, I don't know that I was conscious enough when you're in that much pain. I don't know if I was conscious enough to really formulate what do I want this experience to be. It was like, I need somebody to rescue me, from my thoughts. I need to release all this pain. That was really what I was hoping for. And to be honest, I had had therapy before and it was crap. It was trash. So I would go for a couple sessions and they're checking their watch, they're looking at the time, they're making me fill out a ton of paperwork. It was not a great experience. So I didn't know what to expect this time around. I didn't expect, to be honest, that I mean, I've had therapists up to that point try to sell me stuff on the side, like, hey, I sell this cable. Do you want to buy it? And I'm like, wait, what? So I didn't have really high hopes. I just wanted the pain to end. So I was desperate to try anything.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Like, so then what was your experience like when you actually started going and opening up, and what was the experience like for you?
It was life-changing. It was life-changing because for me, therapy is like even when you think about addictions work, yes, you can have all the tools there, but you have to have the willingness. You have to decide you no longer want to be ambivalent about it. You have to be proactive about your own treatment. And it's the same thing with therapy. You can have a therapist that isn't quite the greatest. There's a lot of mediocre, average therapists out there, I'll be honest, but I had a desire to have a different life, to have a different experience. So I went in with that desire. She provided a safe space in a lot of ways in that she let me talk and let me get my thoughts out. What I didn't expect that she did that didn't really work for me, to be honest, is she had her bias sometimes came through. Like I chose forgiveness for him and she'd say, "Well, you're getting letting him off too easily. You're letting people run over you and you're letting people." But those were her values, right? My values, and what she didn't realize is it wasn't that I was this altruistic being. It was that I needed to feel empowered. And if I felt like all these people were doing all these things to me, then I don't feel very empowered. If I feel like there's responsibility that I can take for how I ended up this way. I'm not deserving of the abuse, but I'm responsible for my own safety. And there were things that I could have done differently that empowered me to know that I can have a different future if I make some different choices. And so it was a challenge because I heard myself say those words and I believed them. But it was a challenge because I didn't have a therapist that necessarily co signed that. She really felt like, I understand you're a Christian and you think these. And I'm like, it's not just because I'm a Christian, it's because I don't want to feel like I'm being victimized day in and day out. So that it was bittersweet, but it was in that moment that I decided that I was going to be reborn as who I was
Mm.
supposed to be, not who I had become in order to accommodate people. So I took accountability for myself in that time, and I took accountability for my happiness. And it's always been an uphill journey. It will forever be one, but it's been one that has been. I can go back to that moment, August 26, 2004, and say, in that moment, there was a rebirth.
That's beautiful. And you do you was it do you remember it being difficult for you as a therapist reaching out for help, like, and being vulnerable about the state that you're in, the pain that you're in? Was that difficult for you, like a humbling experience?
Prior to that, absolutely. When I would try to get a appointment with a therapist, I was like, "Are they judging me?" Prior to that, absolutely. In that moment, though, that moment that sent me into therapy, to be honest, I was so out of it in terms of outside of my body, not really connected, that I was desperate for help. I wasn't even considering, well, I'm a therapist. I should know this. I've been trained in this. I wasn't. That was the most humbling experience ever because I had nothing left to give myself. And so I just knew I needed help and I didn't care who gave it to me or how.
Pain has that effect of really humbling us and getting us ready to take action we hadn't previously been willing to take. So, in the last minute or 2 here, what do you came to me with this idea, and I loved it, about people sharing their experiences of going to therapy, and maybe talking to a lot of therapists about their experience going to therapy, and just a wide variety of people. What do you hope to accomplish with this show, or what kind of stories do you want to explore? What do you want the listener to get out of it?
I think we talk about the stigma of mental health and therapy. And I think, mental health and therapy have been really trendy words that a lot of people outside the space use because it sounds great. But the truth of it is everybody has mental health and everybody needs good mental health hygiene. And everybody may not have a mental health illness, but it doesn't mean that you're not susceptible to a mental health crisis, right? And so I want us to see the humanity in it. And I want to kind of lift the veil off of what people perceive therapy to be and what it actually is. And so I just had this idea that whether it's my clients, former clients, whether it's somebody else's clients, whether it's therapists, we all have a story to tell and that's what connects us. And so I want to build a community of connection and so that's why I'm so glad that we were able to do this together. I'm excited for it.
Oh, me too. Me too. First of many great conversations. And I think this is the last question I want to end with is what is something that you learned through that process of going to therapy that you were describing that you wouldn't have been able to learn without going to therapy?
I don't know that I would have been able to learn that it's okay to acknowledge our challenges, right? I had to put a mirror up, like literally a mirror up to myself and acknowledge the maladaptive coping that I had learned that was very much of the ugly parts of me, but it isn't necessarily me. My behaviors and how I learned to cope in the world are separate from who I inherently am. People are inherently good, but we learn sometimes poor coping in order to deal. And it's okay to acknowledge that without putting that cloak on and like, that's my identity. That's not my identity. That's how I learned to get through the world. Without therapy, I don't know that I would have ever really looked at myself that way, taken accountability, because I thought I was this altruistic being that has just helped everybody and nobody's helping me the way I'm helping them. And it wasn't true. I was doing things to get needs met and not always in the best way. So it gave me a full picture of who I was and my ability to understand myself better. And I think that's remarkable and it's necessary for all of us.
So well put. And I think it's the emotional risk taking of therapy lets you internalize that and feel it like kind of in your bones in a way that you could have read all those words on a page and it would have been like, "Oh, that sounds good." But going through the process of humbling yourself, opening up, like that's where it really sinks in, I think.
Yeah. And it's grueling, just to tell anybody, it's grueling in some parts of it because you realize things you never knew. But there's nobody who knows me like me. And the freedom to tell my story, Like, nobody controls my narrative but me. Nobody shames me for it. I own each piece of anything I've done or said or experienced because it's all part of what led me to this point. And there's such a levity and a liberty in that that you can't get from hiding behind coping mechanisms or hiding behind truths that need to be revealed. So I recommend it to any and every person, even if you don't have a mental health illness, just because you want to grow and know yourself better. I strongly recommend it.
Beautiful. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end it, Sheree. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Matt. I'm looking for many more of these conversations.
Yes, indeed. All right. Take care.